Hello, my name is Ken, and welcome to my 10-question quiz about those who were first to do it in aviation. I put this quiz together for educational purposes and for all of you aviation enthusiasts out there. So I hope you enjoy it and I hope you learn something. Each question is worth 10 points. So good luck, and here we go. Question 1. Who was the first in human history to fly in an aircraft? Is the answer A, Montgolfier brothers on September the 19th, 1783 in Versailles, France? Or is it B, two Frenchmen on November the 21st, 1783 in Paris, France? Or is it C, Otto Lilienthal on December the 2nd, 1891 in Berlin, Germany? Or is it D, Orville and Wilbur Wright on December the 17th, 1903 at Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina? The correct answer is B. There is no record of the Montgolfier brothers ever flying in a hot air balloon themselves, but on September the 19th of 1783, they did tether one of their hot air balloons up to an estimated altitude of about 3,000 feet with a sheep, a duck, and a rooster on board. It was an experiment that the Montgolfier brothers performed to see if animals could survive at a higher altitude above the surface of the earth, and the animals did live. So 3 months later, in Paris, France, on November the 21st of 1783, two Frenchmen, a science teacher and a French military officer, together made a short 3-mile flight, but a successful flight, in a Montgolfier hot air balloon, and making them the very first humans in world history to successfully fly in an aircraft. Many of you out there probably chose answer D, the Wright brothers, but the key word in the question is aircraft, not airplane. An aircraft is a craft that flies through the air, which includes airplanes and helicopters and gliders and gyrocopters and dirigibles, and yes, even a hot air balloon. Question 2. Who was best known for experimenting with various gliders and various airfoils in the 1890s? Was it A, Sir George Cayley in England? Or was it B, Louis Blériot in France? Or was it C, Otto Lilienthal in Germany? Or was it D, Orville and Wilbur Wright in the United States? The answer is C, Otto Lilienthal in Germany. On December the 2nd of 1891, Otto Lilienthal made his very first successful glider flight near Berlin, Germany. And back during that time period, people referred to him as the Glider King because there was no one else on the planet who knew more about gliders and various airfoils than Otto Lilienthal. And in fact, the Wright brothers studied Lilienthal's previous experiments with gliders and airfoils that helped the Wright brothers go on and design their own gliders and various airfoils that eventually helped the Wright brothers produce the world's very first successful airplane. the Wright Flyer? Question 3. Who was the first person to successfully fly an airplane across the English Channel on July the 25th, 1909? Was it A, Louis Blériot from France? Or is it B, Sir Thomas Sopwith from England? Or was it C, Max Immelmann from Germany? Or is it D, Anthony Fokker from Holland? The answer is A, Louis Blériot from France. Early in the morning on July the 25th of 1909, Louis Blériot from France took off in his airplane from a small village located very near Calais, France, and he set his 22-mile-long flight course out across the English Channel towards Dover, England. And the flight almost failed because during his flight, his engine began to excessively overheat. But, as good luck will sometimes happen, he flew into a rain shower that cooled his engine down, that allowed him to complete his flight on to Dover, England. And Louis Blériot from France became the very first person in history to fly an airplane across the English Channel. Sir Thomas Sopwith designed and built the British Sopwith Camel, a fighter plane of World War I fame. Max Immelmann was a famous World War I German fighter pilot who was also famous for creating a particular aerobatic maneuver against his enemy opponents. And to this very day, that particular aerobatic maneuver is still called an Immelmann. And Anthony Fokker was a famous early aviation aircraft designer, and he is probably most famous for designing and building the Fokker triplane, the World War I German fighter plane that had 3 wings, and the same airplane that was painted red and flown by the famous German fighter ace, Manfred von Richthofen, but best known as the Red Baron. Question 4. All 4 of these men were important pioneers in early aviation, but who was the first person in human history to successfully fly a self-propelled, fully controllable airplane? Was it A, Wilbur Wright? Or was it B, Alberto Santos Dumont? Or was it C, Professor Samuel Pierpont Langley? Or was it D, Orville Wright? The answer is D, Orville Wright. In 1903, many people believed that Professor Langley from Massachusetts would be the first person to successfully achieve controlled, powered flight. But on December the 8th of 1903, when Professor Langley launched what he called his aerodrome from a boat, his flying contraption just crashed into the Potomac River, and that was the end of that. 6 days later, on December the 14th of 1903, at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the Wright brothers, Wilbur and Orville from Dayton, Ohio, flipped a coin, and Wilbur won the coin toss. But on takeoff, something went wrong, and the Wright Flyer was damaged. And then 3 days later, after the necessary repairs were completed, and on December the 17th of 1903, it was Orville's turn at the controls, and the rest is aviation history. Question 5. Who was the first person to successfully fly an airplane solo, non-stop, from the United States across the Atlantic Ocean and on to Europe in May 1927? Was it A, Douglas Wrongway Corrigan? Or was it B, Albert C. Reed? Or was it C, Charles Lindbergh? Or was it D, Amelia Lady Lindy Earhart? The answer is C, Charles Lindbergh. On May the 20th of 1927, 25-year-old Charles Lindbergh took off from Roosevelt Field in Garden City, New York in his airplane called the Spirit of St. Louis and made his 33-hour historic solo nonstop flight from the United States to Paris, France, a distance of 3,600 statute miles. Lindbergh's Ryan-built airplane was called the Spirit of St. Louis because it was several wealthy businessmen in St. Louis, Missouri, who sponsored the historic flight that would have not been possible without their financial support. In Paris, the Spirit of St. Louis was disassembled and shipped back to the United States on a cargo ship. And today, the Spirit of St. Louis is on display at the Smithsonian Museum in Washington, D.C. And now, here is some more historic information. The very first airplane to fly from the United States to Europe happened 8 years before Lindbergh's historic solo non-stop flight, when in May of 1919, a U.S. Navy flying boat called the NC-4 with a crew of several Navy officers flew from Rockport, Massachusetts, and on to England. But that trip took 19 days with several stops for fuel, supplies, and aircraft repairs, and a change of the flight crew. But the one Navy officer who did complete the entire trip and was one of the pilots was Albert C. Reed. The Glenn Curtiss NC-4 is a very large, open cockpit, flying boat biplane with 4 big engines, and today it's on display at the U.S. Navy Aviation Museum in Pensacola, Florida. Question 6. Who was the first woman to successfully fly an airplane solo, non-stop, across the Atlantic Ocean from Canada and on to Ireland in May 1932? Was it A, Jacqueline Cochran? Or was it B, Blanche Scott? Or was it C, Elise DeRoche? Or was it D, Amelia Earhart? The answer is D, Amelia Earhart. On May the 20th, 1932, and 5 years after Charles Lindbergh's historic flight, 34-year-old Amelia Earhart took off from Grace Harbor in Newfoundland, Canada, in her all-red, single-engine Lockheed Vega airplane and made her own historic flight by flying solo, non-stop, 2,000 miles to Ireland in 15 hours and becoming the very first woman in history to make a transatlantic solo flight. Amelia Earhart had the nickname Lady Lindy because of her strong resemblance to Charles Lindbergh and because they were both pilots and because of their looks, they could have passed for brother and sister. In July of 1937, Amelia Earhart mysteriously disappeared while she was trying to circumnavigate around the world in a twin-engine Lockheed 10 Electra airplane. And here's some more early aviation history. The two earliest known female pilots dates back to 1910. Elise de Roche in France and Blanche Scott in the United States. In May of 1953, a woman named Jackie Cochran was the very first woman in history to fly an airplane faster than the speed of sound when she broke through the sound barrier in an F-86 Sabre jet. Question 7. Who was the first person to successfully fly an airplane solo around the world in July 1933? Was it A, Douglas Wrongway Corrigan? Or was it B, Wiley Post? Or was it C, Charles Lindbergh? Or was it D, James Jimmy Angel? The answer is B, Wiley Post. Wiley Post was a very famous early aviation pioneer who was from Oklahoma. And in July of 1933, he took off from New York in his single-engine Lockheed Vega airplane that he called the Winnie Mae, and 7 days and 18 hours later, he landed back in New York again after circumnavigating around the world with several stops for fuel in several other countries. And then after that historical feat, Wiley Post went on and discovered the high-altitude jet stream. And Wiley Post was the original pioneer in designing and experimenting with high-altitude pressure suits that would eventually someday lead to astronaut spacesuits. Sadly, on August the 15th of 1935, the world-famous Oklahoma aviator Wiley Post and the world-famous Oklahoma humorist Will Rogers were both killed in an aircraft accident in Alaska. And now for some more aviation history. In 1938, and more than 10 years after Charles Lindbergh's historic feat, an American pilot named Douglas Corrigan took off from New York to fly back to California. But 28 hours later, he landed in Ireland, and he claimed that he had misread his magnetic compass, and that's what earned him the nickname Douglas Wrongway Corrigan. But aviation historians claim that the whole thing was just a publicity stunt. In 1933, an American pilot named James Angel was flying his single-engine Belanca airplane over the jungles of Venezuela in South America when he discovered the world's highest waterfall. Angel Falls is 3,212 feet high, which is almost 3/4 of a mile high, or 6 times higher than the Washington Monument. And Angel Falls is approximately 500 feet wide, 200 feet wider than a football field is in length. Question 8. Who was the first pilot to successfully fly an airplane faster than the speed of sound on October the 14th, 1947? Was it A, Eric Hartman? Or was it B, Paul Tibbets Jr.? Or was it C, Gregory Pappy Boynton? Or was it D, Charles Chuck Yeager? The answer is D, Chuck Yeager. On October the 14th of 1947, and from a very high altitude, Chuck Yeager, in his Bell X-1 rocket plane, was dropped from the belly of a Boeing B-29 bomber, and he became the first person in history to break the sound barrier and fly an aircraft faster than the speed of sound. And it was also the first time in history that anyone on the ground had ever heard a sonic boom that was produced by an aircraft. Chuck Yeager named his rocket plane after his wife, Glamorous Glennis. And now, here is some more early aviation history. The top fighter ace of all time is Erich Hartmann, a German Luftwaffe pilot during World War II. Hartmann engaged in 825 separate aerial combats, and he is credited with 352 confirmed kills. And he was awarded Germany's highest medal, the Knight's Cross of the Iron Cross, with oak leaves, swords, and diamonds. On August the 6th of 1945, Paul Tibbets Jr. was the pilot of the Boeing B-29 bomber, nicknamed the Enola Gay, and it was the first time in history that a nuclear weapon had ever been used on an enemy target, when the United States dropped an atom bomb on Hiroshima, Japan. Gregory "Pappy" Boynton was a famous U.S. Marine Corps fighter pilot, and he was the leader of a group of fighter planes called the Black Sheep Squadron. Pappy Boynton is credited with 28 confirmed kills, and he earned the Congressional Medal of Honor. Question 9. Who was the first woman to successfully fly an airplane solo around the world in March and April 1964? Was it A, Geraldine "Jerry" Mock? Or was it B, Bessie Coleman? Or was it C, Sally Ride? Or was it D, Gina Yeager? The answer is A, Geraldine "Jerry" Mock. On March the 19th, 1964, Geraldine Mock took off from the Columbusport Airport in Ohio in her single-engine Cessna 180 airplane and made a 29-day and 12-hour solo flight around the world with several stops for fuel in several other countries. And after flying 23,103 miles, she landed back in Ohio again on April the 17th, 1964, and made history by becoming the first woman to fly an airplane solo around the world. And now, here is some more early aviation history. In 1921, Bessie Coleman from Texas became the first African American woman to earn a pilot's license. And in June of 1983, Sally Ride became the first American female astronaut to travel into outer space. On December the 14th, 1986, pilots Gina Yeager and Dick Rutan took off from Edwards Air Force Base in California in a specially built airplane called the Rutan Voyager. And 9 days later, on December the 23rd, 1986, they landed back at Edwards Air Force Base again and made world history by becoming the very first pilots to fly an airplane non-refueling and non-stop around the world. And oh, by the way, Gina Yeager and Chuck Yeager are not related to each other. Question 10. Who was the first human to travel into outer space? Was it A, Yuri Gagarin? Or was it B, Alan Shepard? Or was it C, John Glenn? Or was it D, Neil Armstrong? The answer is A, Yuri Gagarin. In October 1957, the Soviet Union, the Russians, put up the world's first orbiting satellite that they called Sputnik. And then, 3.5 years later, and on April the 12th of 1961, Yuri Gagarin, a Soviet Union Russian cosmonaut, orbited around the Earth in a space capsule called Vostok 1, and he became the first human in history to travel into outer space. I was only 12 years old at the time, but I still remember it well, and I still remember how mad some of our school teachers and parents were because the Soviet Union, the Russians, had beaten us, the United States, in the race to be first in outer space. And now here's some more early space history. 23 days after Gagarin's historic flight into outer space, and on May the 5th of 1961, Alan Shepard, a U.S. Navy test pilot, became the first American astronaut to travel into outer space when he took a 300-mile-high, 15-minute suborbital flight in a space capsule called Freedom 7. The number 7 was used in honor of the original 7 American astronauts. Military pilots Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, John Glenn, Gus Grissom, Wally Schirra, Alan Shepard, and Deke Slayton. And I still remember very well, too, how proud we all were of our original 7 American astronauts. On February the 20th, 1962, John Glenn became the first American astronaut to orbit around the Earth in a space capsule called Friendship 7. Very shortly after Alan Shepard's historic flight in May of 1961, President John F. Kennedy announced to the world that the United States would put an American astronaut on the moon before the end of the decade. And many people did not believe that that could be done before 1970. On July the 21st, 1969, the United States astronaut, Neil Armstrong, became the first human in history to set foot on the lunar surface of the moon.